Hello. Here they come. All of our friends at once. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Settle in. We drinking coffee. We drinking matcha, tea, water, Gatorade, cola. It's 1 p.m. my time. I feel like I'm in need of a third coffee, and I've only had one. I think I need a quad shot. I don't know where you're at. Karen Lewis is drinking an Arnold Palmer. Legendary. That is awesome. I haven't had an Arnold Palmer in a while. Welcome. Looks like we got over 50 folks here. Just as we're settling in, before we ask you a more serious warm-up question, go ahead and drop where you're coming from and the role you play in your district or your school, community, your home, wherever you're coming at us from today. Go ahead and share with us where you're coming from and what your role is. Olympia, Washington in the building. If you want other folks to be able to see your answers, make sure you're sending the message to both panelists and attendees. So far, selfishly, we're getting all of these messages, Clay. But we got Olympia, Washington in the house. Houston, Texas is here. Issaquah, Washington, Burlington, Katy, Texas, Winona, Minnesota. Minnesota in the building. Your home state, Clay.
There we go.
We got the American Sign Language teacher from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Forks, Washington in the building. Hi, Brenda. Watsonville, Corvallis, Oregon, Raleigh, North Carolina. It's always so fun just to see all the humans from all over. Karen Lewis is here from Katy. Hi, Karen. LAUSD. Welcome. That's fun. I got people in your backyard and in my backyard, Clay. I'm here in Los Angeles myself, Emily. Really glad to have you here. Alejandro Cervantes. Hello, my friend. Baldwin Park, California. Good to see you, Alex. So happy to have you. Oh my goodness. All these good humans. Duluth, Minnesota's here. Fort Collins, Colorado. Iowa. We got good representation here, Clay. I'm super excited. Well, as we're getting started, one more final reflection question to drop into the chat. Virtual or not, and whatever the circumstance you're in right now, what is the question? The question of your relational question that has you've asked your students that has gotten the most engagement? I'm interested. What question have you asked your students, virtually or not, that you feel like has had the most responses out loud or in a chat? What sort of question, or what question specifically have you asked that you feel like has really gotten students thinking, sharing, chatting? What is truth? What do you want more of in your life? What can I do to help? Tell me what you enjoy doing. Good questions. Rachel, what is truth? Is this like you asking kindergartens this question? I have to think about that one for a while. Who are you when no one's looking? Weekly highs and lows. Favorite song, video game, or food? Rachel says she asks high schoolers that. That makes more sense, Clay. If you could travel anywhere. Rebecca, pie or salad for the rest of your life? Well, I think it depends on the implications to my body. Is this with a null effect overall to my health? Because I think we all know the answer then. So fantastic. Well, I'm gonna get out of the way, Clay, and introduce you, a great champion of this work, someone who has been one of the huge advocates for us since we first started Character Strong, saying, I think you got something here. The way you're bringing social emotional learning and character development, and I believe some of the early encouragement, and still today that encouragement also looks like it doesn't matter how good your curriculum is, doesn't matter how much evidence you put behind it right now. We need to create things that are relevant and engaging, and more than anything, we need strategies as adults in the building to build those relationships effectively, because curriculum and content is only as good as the trust or relationships that you are serving it to. So Dr. Clay Cook at the University of Minnesota, an incredible resource, one of my favorite humans to listen to, who brings together story and practice today, talking about establish, maintain, restore. Passing it to you, Clay. Take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's been really cool to see Character Strong go beyond just being a curriculum, because on the SEL front, what we have is a lot of curriculum instruction, and we're leaning on trying to cultivate an environment that promotes kids' well-being and ultimately engaging in substantive relational practices to ensure that kids feel a sense of belonging and connection. And so I'm going to take us through a methodology that's actually incorporated. It's incorporated into Character Strong. We developed it when I was a professor at the University of Washington, because there was virtually an absence of concrete practices that are devoted to building healthy relationships, teacher to student relationships, to cultivate those relationships, maintain those relationships, and if needed, engage in a restorative process to kind of fix and repair any harm that's been done to a relationship, to continuously engage kids in the learning process. And so we're going to go over establish, maintain, restore as hopefully a practical methodology that is actually incorporated into Character Strong under what's called adult relationship practices. That is a core component of delivering Character Strong with fidelity. It's not just curriculum in terms of a teaching and learning perspective. It's also adult relationship practices where the adults are modeling those relationship practices and staying focused on establishing, maintaining, and restoring relationships with kids. So I want to get to the why. Again, this just hopefully a little bit of a preaching to the choir part of this, and then, hopefully open it up to some interesting dialogue around the what and how we get into this. So many people, you've heard this metaphor. We like to talk about our plates in schools. Most of the time we talk about how our plate's too full. And oftentimes I've even heard people say, I don't have time, my plate's too full to do things in the spirit of cultivating relationships with kids. And I would say, everybody out of the water, we're missing the point, because when it boils down to it, relationships are the plate. Schooling is a relational process built upon interactions with one another that kids take in through their senses, because we create relational experiences that kids take in through their senses, what they see, what they hear, what they touch, feel, do, and experience, and think about those experiences impacts whether they feel like they belong. And belonging turns out to be a core human need. So you can't get through a presentation without an iceberg image. And so here it is. But the things we see are behavior, performance, and attendance. And the things we see are impacted by the things we can't see. And those are things internal to what kids, based on their perceptions, the thoughts they're having about their experiences in schools, the feelings that come up for them based on being in school, and ultimately this idea of sense of belonging. You only know if someone feels a strong sense of belonging if you ask them and they told you the truth. So I would love just to pause for a second, and if people can in the chat share just if belonging isn't in place, what do we see in terms of behavior? So when someone is lacking a sense of belonging, how does that manifest in the behavior we see? And you can envision this for a teacher, a staff person, or you can talk about it as a kid level. What are the behaviors we're likely to see when someone doesn't feel like they belong? So a lot of the things we see are symptoms of something missing. So disengagement, acting out, withdrawing, anger. The things we see are actually symptoms. The root cause for those symptoms, the behavioral symptoms, are something missing internally for the person. If you look nationally speaking, those of you who've heard me speak before, the data are not exciting when it comes to sense of belonging. 40% of secondary kids report there's not a single adult in the building who cares about them. And if you look at 40% of kids who say that, an inequity story gets told. We know it's more likely to be the case that minoritized students feel a lack of sense of belonging and connection to school. We know students who live in poverty are more likely to feel a lack of sense of belonging and connection to school. So often we find that the kids who need it the most have the weakest sense of belonging and connection. And that's not how it should be. So we have to really take this seriously. We got to create experiences that chip away at the things we can't see. And that's how kids think about themselves, feel in school, and ultimately their sense of belonging and connection in school. Exactly, Brian Smith. Thank you for that. One other piece. What defines belonging? What does it mean? So you hear this a lot now, sense of belonging, sense of belonging. But what characterizes belonging? If you ask the student, what would they say characterizes belonging? I've asked my 4-year-old, what does it mean to know that her teacher cares about her? And she told me, well, my teacher would get me a Band-Aid. And then I probed that a little bit. What do you mean by just get you a Band-Aid? Well, she would notice if I was hurt and she would come and help me. And that's how I know my teacher cares about me. And then I asked my 8-year-old, how would you know your teacher cares about you and that you belong? Well, they would be really interested in me and they would ask all kinds of questions and it wouldn't seem fake. They would be really excited. So what comes up for people? Listening. Someone feels accepted. Like once you've taken an interest and you've learned information about me and you're not holding it against me, you're actually genuinely accepting who I am, not judging me, not trying to change who I am. Yeah, being present in an interaction. Noticing when I'm gone, yeah, versus just missing and ignoring. So we know some of the ingredients, the active ingredients to cultivating sense of belonging. What we often find, there's not a dedicated practice that's brought to life in a school where we've created systems of support for the adults to continuously engage in a process to assess for whom has belonging, for whom doesn't, and how do we intentionally build plans to achieve sense of belonging for all kids in a given context. And so I'm going to go over EMR as a methodology. Now, we have a problem, and I kind of surfaced the problem here. The problem isn't kids aren't a problem, staff aren't a problem, the school isn't a problem, but a problem represents a discrepancy between where we expect outcomes to be for all kids and when we expect outcomes to where we expect outcomes to be for all kids with regard to belonging is 100% of kids belong. Who doesn't want that? But the realities are that if we're not intentional and deliberate about our efforts, we have a huge discrepancy because where outcomes are actually at for many kids, they don't feel like they belong. And in many ways, nobody gets up in the morning and says, I want to intentionally harm a kid's sense of belonging. But if we're not careful, we actually unintentionally create experiences that harm students' sense of belonging and connection to school, which is one of the biggest, most potent motivational factors for engagement in learning experiences. So if you look at, all the different scientific disciplines, I like to say that just all the scientific roads lead to the same destination, whether it's the brain sciences where we learn like human connection and belonging are critical to healthy brain development, clinical psychology that says that it's through the therapeutic relationship people make meaningful change to overcome certain mental health struggles, whether it's social psychology that reminds us that we are influenced by what trusted, respected others do. When we're uncertain about what we want to do, we look to trusted, respected others. So those connections matter. Or it's educational psychology that shows that, human motivation, achievement motivation is driven more by relationship than content, academic content. So we know that we have this rationale for why we want to invest. Another way to think about this is from a hospitable soil metaphor. We're trying to create hospitable soil that enables people to grow. And we know that if we create really healthy, supportive environments that are characterized by a sense of belonging and connection, healthy attachment with the person in charge, and we make sure that environment is proactive, predictable, and positive, we've created the fertile or hospitable soil for kids to grow in development. We know that's true in a home environment. We know that's true in a school context. And if we can create those contexts, both home and school environments, that's where kids flourish and grow and develop. Who is teaching is just as important as what is being taught. This is another way to just keep hitting this message home. I like to just have multiple angles to say why we need to invest in this work so we can begin to start to think through how and what we're going to do to take this work seriously and bring it to life in our buildings. But another way to think about is who is teaching is just as important as what is being taught. And this is important for people who really, 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 really love their subject matter or content. That's true if you really, really love your subject matter and content. To get kids equally excited in it as you are, it's all about relationships, because that engages them and excites them to learn the thing that you're passionate about. So we're not trying to go for an either or. It's either you're good at instruction or you're good at relationship. We're trying to create a context where we have a profile of really awesome relationship building with students to engage them, and really awesome teaching and learning experiences that enable students to develop and grow. Many of you are familiar with John Hattie's work in visible learning. He's basically done meta-analyses of meta-analyses. One of the lessons learned here, that one of the highest leverage practices we can do to move the needle on learning outcomes is positive teacher-student relationships. Now, I'm going to just open this up for chat in the chat function. How is it that relationships don't directly teach a kid how to read, or relationships don't directly teach a kid science, but how is it that relationships lead to improved academic performance? So if people can try to internalize that and articulate that, that would be great. How is it connected to learning? Yeah, they feel safe. And when you feel safe, you can open up. Opens the door. Some people, there's a theory out there called the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. When you actually have strong relationships, kids have more positive affect. And when you have a positive affect, it broadens perspective, it broadens problem solving, it broadens engagement. And if you broaden all those things, if there's a learning experience, someone plugs in more deeply and they're more likely to pick up what you're laying down from an instructional standpoint. Yeah, you present with them. You're present with them. Let me say things correctly. It's been a long day on Zoom. So if I butcher what you're putting in the chat, I apologize, because they're really good ideas. So there is a process how relationships get to learning. And we, the discrepancy here is we do these belief surveys, and 98% of educators, I wish it was 100%, but we don't get 100%, but believe that relationships are essential to educational success. But when we push people to go beyond just relationship, what we find is, let me get my cursor. I'm going to have to go in and go back out real quick. I apologize. I'm going to stop and share and go back in to see if this picks it up. Well, I'm going to continue, but what we find is that there's a discrepancy. While 98% of educators believe that relationships are important, less than a third of them have any kind of common language and dedicated practice around relationship building. So we have a big discrepancy between people's values and what they want and what actually they're doing. I imagine many of you have heard the quote before that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And another way to think about that is, our good intentions can only be materialized into outcomes if we actually take action. And so we need concrete and dedicated practice. Thank you for doing that. If we're able to, have common language and dedicated practice around the work. And if you can go on. And so I want to talk about establish, maintain, restore. This is where our research found that wow, people care deeply about building relationships, but there is no shared practice around doing the work, which led us to really start to build out a model around common language and dedicated practice that staff can share and engage in a process to cultivate relationships with all kids in the building. And the goal is to incrementally, as a community of educators, strive to build sense of belonging and connection with as many students as possible in the building. And the methodology is free on one level, and it's also incorporated into other elements like Character Strong. So give me 1 second here. Can I share my screen and give it a go one more time? Maybe stop sharing real quick. All right, sorry about this, people.
Sorry.
It froze on me, and I'm like, and you just roll with the punches. So EMR is really one thing it's common language. And so the languages captures the different phases or stages of relationship. If you don't have a relationship with someone, you need to establish one. And there is a process when you're in this establishment phase where you're really working to not try to change the person. You're not trying to judge them in any way. You're really accepting. You're working to get to know who they are. And many people haven't really deposited sufficiently into relationships with certain students, particularly students who are culturally dissimilar to themselves. But once you have a relationship, doesn't mean you're going to keep it. You have to maintain it through ongoing positive interactions with the other person. Now, even healthy relationships are bound to have negative interactions that come up, misunderstanding, hurt feelings, maybe conflict that was unavoidable. And so even healthy relationships, we have to have methods to restore and bring the relationship back to its previous healthy state. And so that's the methodology. I was fortunate to learn from John Gottman at the University of Washington, who's a foremost expert in marriage relationships, but also an expert in relationships. And this is where I start to get the inspiration to develop a methodology we can introduce into schools that bring common language and dedicated practice. We've now done 3 different randomized control trials at the elementary level, and we've demonstrated decreases in disruptive behavior relative to business as usual, improvements in teacher-student relationships, and improvements in academic engaged time. Kids spend more time academically engaged in their learning experience, and that's how we see it eventually lead to more distal outcomes in terms of academic achievement. We've done middle school studies, and we found we replicated our findings at the middle school level when we support teachers to learn about this methodology. We protect time for them to engage in a PLC process. So they're doing what we call relationship reflections, and then developing student-specific relationship action plans. That's kind of the methodology of EMR. We see improvements in these outcomes of interest. And we have some high school evidence where we see increases in motivation. We see increases in student sense of belonging. We just wrapped up a randomized control trial as part of a Institute of Educational Sciences grant at the high school level to look at it as a EMR as a potential dropout prevention strategy. And we've made a wide variety of cultural and equity-centered adaptations to ensure that the relationship practices work across different subgroups of students. So what is EMR? It is a framework. It's shared language about the phase of relationship. It's about shared practices so people can join together, sharing practices and talk about them and exchange ideas around them to work together to achieve the outcomes of interest, which are cultivating sense of belonging for as many kids as possible over the course of the year. And it's also a system of implementation supports. And I'm going to show you some of those here where we have relationship reflection forums, we have PLCs, we have what's called an EMR playbook, which is like a practice profile. It takes each practice, really operationalizes and defines what each practice looks like. And we have a method of gathering relationship data. This is the first way we get things kicked off in EMR. We have what's called the equity tree exercise. And so imagine for a given class, for secondary schools, we say, take the class that you might be struggling with the most, because it's probably the class you have the weakest relationships with. For elementary, they just take their class. Now, a number of apples represent the number of kids in the class. What we do is we split up the tree into thirds. Bottom of the tree kids are what we call low-hanging fruit. Because you probably have a lot shared with them, it's pretty easy. You know that you got them relationally. You have sense of belonging and connection. Middle of the tree kids need a little more attention and effort, but you ultimately got a sense of belonging and connection. Top of the tree kids are kids for whom you have not yet established a relationship with. And we have equity reflections. Is gender equally distributed across our tree? Is race, ethnicity equally distributed across our tree? Is socioeconomics equally distributed across my tree? What this does is increase people's awareness about the disparities that exist in their own classroom context regarding for whom is in a positive relationship with the person in charge and who has power, and for whom is not. Who is not. What do you think people find? For whom do educators tend to have the weakest relationships with? And if you can, go ahead in the chat, share some of your thoughts around that piece. When we do this kind of equity reflection, what do you think are some of the findings people uncover? Yeah, the students least like them is a very simple way to think that. Culturally, interest, preference-wise. Yeah, quiet kids. Some kids could be missed. Certain biases come into play. We know implicit racial biases are real, and they impact our decisions, judgments, and behaviors towards others. It's not something you can get rid of. It's something you have to manage and regulate and be intentional about. Those who you have shared hobbies and life experiences with, it's probably that connection's going to go. Yes, students who, if we're taking that maybe cisgender is the norm for teachers, then those who don't connect or are outside have weaker relationships. There's not as much shared or sense of safety. So it's important from this lens, and the goal isn't here to say, okay, who do we have who do we have weak relationships with, and stop there. What the EMR process is, what we call, we have to extend a relationship ladder to those students who are at the top of our trees. Those are the students who we need, because we only have a finite amount of time and attention to devote to this. Not all kids need our intentionality. So who do we want to focus our attention on from an equity perspective? And so these are the students we develop student-specific relationship action plans. And so we have what's called an EMR reflection form, where a person would go through their roster and locate where they're at in the relationship phase. And we operationally define that. We have data we feed back to teachers that aren't student-specific, though, because students need to know that they can answer truthfully when asked whether they have a sense of belonging and connection to their teacher. And we found that students don't truth tell when they know that the teacher can link the data to them. It's just like staff sometimes. We keep it anonymous, and we see truth telling and more accurate reporting go up. So the teacher has data from the students and their own reflection, and they're locating where kids are at in this process. And the goal, though, is to move kids to what we call the favorable relationship state, and that's in the maintain category. Over the course of the year, I want all kids to be in the maintain. That means I have a strong sense of belonging and connection and a healthy relationship established with kids. Now we have an EMR action plan, and really this is, once you've identified kids who can benefit from intentional relationship strategies, now what are you going to do? What is the EMR practice you're going to use? How will you do it? When will you do it? How will you hold yourself accountable to do it? What barrier might come up that would get in the way of me doing it? And ultimately, when this barrier arises, how will I overcome it? I'm convinced of all the studies we've done in partnership with schools, this action planning process is the driver to changes. Because we know through other research, if people don't plan what they're going to do, they don't necessarily follow through with that. Planning is an essential piece to actually being able to follow through with one's intentions. And so I'm pretty convinced the PLC process we created, which is structured, that ends with a student-specific relationship action planning process, is what promotes positive changes and outcomes. So I'm going to just pause for a second. Do people have any brief questions about the how pieces, like the implementation supports around EMR, before I move into kind of the what? And here what I want to do is just give a good survey of practices, the types of practices. Okay, I'm going to jump in here. So it's established there's a different categories of practices. And then the goal here is to really locate what practices do I think would be most important. And so there's 4 categories of practices. Do I need to devote time to get to know a student because I don't know much about them, so I don't have shared understanding? So then I'm going to select one of the practices here, and I can describe what those are. Banking time is a strategy where I'm going to spend time to get to know the kid using open-ended questions, reflectively listen, express interest in what they have to say. I could use methods to get to know the details of students' lives. So I engage in an information gathering process for the kid to share information about who they are, what makes them tick, what are things they like and what are things they dislike, what would they do with $1 million, what would they do, what would they not? If they could choose to spend time with anybody, what would it be? Those pieces of information, we get to know the details of kids' lives, and we make sure we keep stock of it and reference it in ways that are kind of natural, so kids start to recognize this person is keeping stock of who I am as a person and accepting me for who I am. Do I think the kid can benefit from hearing that I have high expectations and high beliefs in them and that I'm there to support them? And so there's different strategies if I think that's going to do the trick to help establish a relationship. Sometimes we recognize certain students need to feel empowered by having voice, input, recognizing their choice, and then giving and sharing power to them. Giving the student power, an example of that is you give them a responsibility that has power in a classroom to have an influence on what's going on. And there's different ways we can give and share power with students as a strategy to show that we care about who they are and that they have an influence on the environment. There's other methods. A couple of these are my tried and true ones because we've done independent randomized control trials on these strategies alone. Positive greetings at the door, making sure we're not ignoring kids and we're seeing each and every one of them and authentically welcoming them into our learning environment. Whether you're virtual, we've created virtual positive greetings at the door in remote learning, or whether you're in person, this is a very powerful strategy in and of itself to maintain healthy connections with students and have daily opportunities to connect and cultivate belonging. And then talk them up to other adults is one of my favorite techniques that many people have super creative ways of doing. It's also called indirect compliments. But what we do is we pay close attention to someone in a non-creepy, non-awkward way. We're not like stalking them, but we're paying a close attention to what they say, do, and achieve. But we relay, rather than deliver a direct compliment, we relay that information through another important adult in their life. That has a more powerful impact on building and establishing an initial relationship than a direct compliment. When you don't have a relationship with someone initially and you give someone else a direct compliment, often they don't know how to take it. They sometimes feel manipulated by the direct compliment because it seems transactional. The only reason why you're giving me that compliment is because you want me to shut up and turn in work. You're not giving me the compliment because you deeply care about, because there's a string attached to the compliment. So indirect compliments take away that string. It's no longer attached because there's nothing for the adult to gain out of the interaction. So what are powerful ways people can engage in this kind of talking them up to other adults? What have people found? Because there's all kinds of ways we get indirect compliments through other adults. Who are the adults we could use? Because if I'm a teacher, I'm finding my other adults and I need to know who are the important adults in the kids' lives. And then I'm using them to relay information to recognize the good. Parents, those phone calls home, notes home, nurses, coaches, counselors, admin. Yeah, other siblings, if they look up to their siblings. Yeah, they might have a favorite teacher they talked about, someone from previous years. So these are all the techniques. What we have is called an EMR playbook. The playbook really delineates and describes and operationalizes each of these practices. Now, it's the goal of the teacher, so a teacher doesn't feel stuck. They have practices they can select from and then start to detail out in a plan in terms of what they plan to do differently with the kid to cultivate a sense of belonging and connection. In no way does EMR say that you're handcuffed to only use these strategies. There could be other ways, effective techniques people find helpful to build relationships with kids. And I guess I would open that up too. What other strategies, what's missing from here that could be a powerful technique to establish a relationship, go from not having a relationship to cultivating a relationship where that kid feels a sense of belonging and connection and trust? What are other techniques or things that can be used? Yeah, engaging in some form of play and fun, sharing that experience. You know, Tessa knows the way to my heart. If you want to build a relationship, let's do it over food. Sharing about yourself. Yeah, appropriate self-disclosure can be so powerful. You're letting kids into the humanity of yourself. Yeah, oh, you know that one, the one by Nancy. This one's hard to pull off sometimes, but if you pull it off, the potency of it is so big. You show up to an event that they're involved in. And why did you show up? Because you wanted to see them and you wanted to be there. That could be, these aren't all created equal. A strategy like that, if you can find the time and energy, because a lot of people have obligations outside, but if you can pull it off and you're really worrying about a kid, the dividends can pay forward for a long time. Nobody's ever measured it from a research standpoint, but we know just anecdotally the powerful impact it can have. So I'm going to move us along. And Houston, how much time do I have again? I'm sorry. I'm trying to track my day, and I'm
You're good. I would say finish up what you got here. We have up until all the way 2. We can always leave space for questions or get people out of here early.
Okay. So banking time, I've already kind of gone over this. There's other resources, but it's a methodology. Banking is used as in the word, in the sense of, I need to find time because I got to deposit more into this relationship, or I'm going to struggle. Like when I'm trying to withdraw things instructionally or from an engagement standpoint, I'm going to struggle. So I got to spend time depositing into the relationship. And that's where the term banking time came from. I mentioned these, talk them up through other adults. These are really powerful techniques. These are things people have control over doing to build relationships and ultimately cultivate students' engagement in school. Now, here's the, not so good story about marriages, relationships, friendships, or whatever it is. If we don't intentionally engage in relationship maintenance practices, relationships virtually in every space, this isn't always true, but on average, they get worse over time, not better. And there's longitudinal relationships with teachers, with students in classrooms. Even if you get the year off to a good start, you're not going to end the year in the same place. The relationships with students are going to get worse on their time over time, not better, if there's not intentional maintenance practices that are being used. And this is true from bosses to employees, to friendships and marriages. And so the way to combat this is this is common language in schools. It's the 5-to-1 ratio. And this is where this research actually came out, started by John Gottman at the University of Washington, who looked at kind of what relationships, marriages stand kind of the test of time and are still continue to be healthy and engaged. And it's the marriages where there's a ratio of 5 positive interactions to 1 negative. They then did randomized control studies supporting couples to intentionally strive to achieve 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. And what it showed is you can save marriages and persist healthy, well-functioning marriages over time. Now, the research extended to the private sector, where they realized that the average ratio between bosses and employees was more negative interactions to positive interactions, but high-performing organizations are characterized by roughly a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. We took this research into schools, and we've found the same kind of ratio effect come to life. Environments that are thriving with high amounts of student engagement and productivity have roughly a ratio of 5-to-1 positive to negative interactions, and environments less than that tend to have more disengagement, more disruptive behaviors, and the like. And that's why it's called the magic ratio. So how do you maintain healthy relationships? Well, I got to make sure I'm increasing my positive interactions and preventing negative interactions. Even with my own kids, I want to increase my positive interactions and not get in a rut of consistent negative interactions. Because I'm the parent, I might find myself correcting and setting limits a lot, and those can start to unbalance the nature with which we interact. And all of a sudden I'm finding I'm having a higher ratio of negative interactions to positive. So I need to intentionally and purposefully identify ways in which I can engage in positive interactions. And there's 2 forms of that. Non-contingent, meaning there is no string attached. It's not based on how a kid previously behaved in my class or the grade they're earning. Are you willing to greet a kid regardless of how they behaved the previous day or what grade they're earning in your class? Those are non-contingent. You're willing to do the things. It's not contingent on anything the kid said, did, or achieved. Contingent positive interactions mean you're paying attention and you interact with someone to show that you appreciate the energy and effort they're putting into a process. And so you're not taking them for granted, or you're not ignoring the energy and effort they're putting into something. And those are contingent positive interactions. Negative interactions we want to prevent. And the way we can do that is developing methods to respond to behavior effectively, where we want to preserve relationship with a kid at all costs, but also get behavior back on track. And there are methods we can engage in. So here's some examples of different non-contingent. The word non-contingent means your positive interaction does not depend on previous stuff. Like if I got in an argument with my wife this morning about something with regard to our daughter, I wouldn't make my greeting of her this afternoon when she gets home contingent on that. If I did, I would create a toxic relationship where the only time I'm going to greet her is if she did what I wanted her to do. How many of you would be like, dude, you're going to end up in divorce? And who would want to be with you? So non-contingent is not dependent on those things. Now, maintaining through responding progressively, we have a method we call the prompt method. It's really a progressive method. When kids do things that we perceive warrants an interaction to get behavior back on track, how do we handle that in a way where we don't harm the relationship, but we get the behavior back on track? And so there's a sequence of strategies going from pausing to make sure we're in control of our own thoughts and feelings and behaviors before we interact, using proximity, redirective tactics, recognizing others for doing what you want, and then gentle private prompts to get the behavior back on track. What are ways, people, and I would that you all find effective when a kid does something an adult doesn't want them to do? How can an adult effectively engage in a reactive strategy with a student to get the behavior back on track but preserve the relationship? What do you all find to be effective to do that? And the reason why I pose it is because usually when kids do things we don't like to do, it starts to get our own emotions going, and it increases the probability we might say or do something that could harm a relationship. Yeah. Just sit like, what do you want out of this? Here's what I want. Some of you are probably familiar with Ross Green's the collaborative problem solving. It's first getting the kid's perspective, sharing your own perspective, and saying, look, let's figure out a win-win. You want this, you find class boring right now. I have to get kids engaged in the process. Let's come up with a plan that works for us. Yep, that question, the pivotal empathy question. Start with a question. Seek to understand the kid's perspective and where they're at. And then we use that information to really get on their turf. Listen, yeah, ask them a question and listen instead of override that and shut the kid down or potentially activate the fight or flight response. So this is a real skillful piece here, because again, when kids do things that we don't necessarily approve of, or they make our life more challenging because it runs against the grain of the plan we have for instruction, it tends to provoke emotion. And if emotions get really going in us, it increases the probability we could say or do something that can harm the relationship. Now, restore is the process of really trying to think through how are we going to fix things and bring it back to its previous state. But if you've never had a relationship with a kid, there's nothing to fix. You're still in establish. So you can't repair something that was never there in the first place. When we do restore relationships, we have to find a window of time. This is different than restorative practices, which has certain questions we direct with kids. We have students think through the motions on how their behavior impacted others, how they can make it right. EMR is a teacher-student relationship approach where the teacher or the adult goes first in repairing. The teacher's taking ownership, because I call it the who goes first. If there's been a negative interaction that's harmed their relationship, who goes first to repair it? And I tend to think the professional who's getting paid and the person with a fully developed brain is the person who models how to engage in a restorative interaction and fix it and repair that relationship to its previous state. So reconnect and repair the relationship. It's kind of a 4-step process. And the main strategies that get emphasized in the restore part of EMR are what we call letting go conversations, taking ownership, mutual problem solving, or statement of care. Now, I would select the strategy based on what I think is going to be most effective. I'm going to develop a hypothesis. If I think the student thinks I'm going to hold a grudge against them, then I'm going to use a letting go conversation. And we try not to prefabricate or can these messages, or else it sounds inauthentic. This has to come from the person authentically. And there's, in my view, a million different ways for an effective letting go conversation to happen with a kid, where the kid really understands that you're not going to hold a grudge and hold kind of old dirt against them and bring that up. Because that is like, John Gottman says it's like sulfuric acid to a relationship to bring up old dirt and continuously hold it against someone else. So sometimes we have to have those pivotal letting go conversations. Taking ownership, if you want a strategy that kids absolutely love, it's the taking ownership. This is where the adult recognizes something they could have handled differently and takes ownership for part of that interaction and how, they could have been more effective and maybe something could have been avoided. And ultimately, the kid's not at sole blame. And so this is in any relationship, to take ownership for part of the the problem that you own is a really effective way so the person doesn't feel like everything's running downhill at them. I already talked about mutual problem solving, where we're going to connect. And this is often for kids who want their voice and perspective heard. So we're going to hear them out. And then we're going to share our ideas. And then we're going to join with them to co-create a plan that could work for both parties. A statement of care is after an interaction where the kid maybe thinks the adult no longer wants them or cares about having them in their class. And a statement of care involves separating the deed from the doer. The example I like to use is, how many of you have been a liar? And so all of you have lied before. What if I took that behavior and I said that defines who you are as a human being, and I just called you liar? I said, hey, what's up, liar? You've been lying today? Because that's what you do. You fundamentally, what you are is a liar. So in this strategy, what we say, hey, your behavior is one thing and we can work on, but after that interaction, I think you might not know how much I care about you and value you as a person. And here's the redeeming quality, or here's the characteristic that I really appreciate and value. And so that's a statement of care. So you're separating the behavior as one thing, and you're identifying the intrinsic redeeming quality on the other hand. So there we go.
Got a challenge for the group.
Yeah, you want to facilitate this? I wasn't ready for that. Sorry.
That's all right. That's coming out of stuff like this. I feel like there's, I always use the 10,000 calorie meal metaphor of like, it's so much good data and it was all delicious. But what do I digest? What could I do right now in practice? And as some folks are going into the holidays and you have that a bit of time off, this is a great time to be intentional looking ahead. I like to think about EMR, Clay, as both equity, as we talked about, but also energy conservation, right? If I don't have to give 100% of myself to all 100 students I serve, or whatever that number is, I get to use my time and energy wisely. I only have a limited amount. So when I have those E's or R's, it actually reduces anxiety, because it's like, okay, I can best use my allocation of energy today, here or here. So the challenge coming out of today is to actually put it into practice. Choose one or more of your class rosters and identify for each student if that relationship is in the EMR, establish, maintain, or restore phase. And all you have to do is you print it out, even on a digital form, write it next to it, make a column next to it in one of your class rosters so that you can see that. And then pick a minimum of 10 students to reach out to, or in the establish or restore phase, to intentionally connect with heading into the holidays. So Clay talked about a lot of what those strategies can be. Sometimes it's as simple as like, I want to let you know I noticed you. I want to let you know that I want to hear what you have going on. I'll show up to your Zoom recital, whatever that thing is. On the low end, a simple comment, a simple compliment, a simple acknowledgement. On the high end, maybe you're showing up even over break for one of those students who you have some restoration with or establishment with. But that's the challenge coming out of today, a practical thing you can do literally right now, even just to give yourself that permission to look through that list and say, all right, what can I give to these 10 students coming into the holidays, which we know for not all students is a good time. It's not always a happy time for many of these students going into the holidays. That being said, Clay, thank you so much for all of the practical wisdom as usual, hyper practical. The analogy is so good, coming at it from all the angles, because we need to be reminded more than instructed, and there's more than one way in. We did have one question that I thought was a good one. It was even referenced a little bit in the chat at some point, Clay, in regards to another situation. But Rowan was asking, I'm having trouble connecting to students who are having tech issues. Any suggestions for students, keeping students included in interaction if their computers are making it difficult for them to engage and communicate without getting new computers? We don't have the power to do that. So any ideas to sort of acknowledge that or tap into that? The first thing that comes to mind for me as you're processing is postcards, the power of a postcard. I've a couple of stories in my life related to people who make that a part of their practice. The handwritten note, which for people this generation is like a revolutionary idea. So delivering some postage to their house could be a really cool idea. What about you, Clay?
Yeah, I mean, it's so reflective of the times. I think about asynchronous ways we can interact. And so can I send, texts, and what ways can I like send information and get and create that asynchronous interaction. And a postcard's an example of an asynchronous interaction that we can facilitate that shows that we care and we want to maintain. And then what are ways we can create synchronous interactions outside of the computer itself? And really thinking nimbly and flexibly on how we can do that to engage with kids despite some of the computer difficulties if they're having Wi-Fi issues based on their home context or whatever. What are other ways we can asynchronously and synchronously interact with kids? And we have to spend a little time creatively. We're kind of working out those details, but a lot of times we can reimagine our interactions when we're stumbling a little bit.
Absolutely. Two ideas that come to mind, even with that frame, Clay. One would be, what if an activity is to, in a Google Doc of some kind, you write a paragraph story about yourself, just something to help you get to know a student. And then you go in as the teacher and you can comment in like a Google Doc, right? Like tag them and comment with a celebration or a question or something, a follow-up. You could do some asynchronous, like sort of storytelling and acknowledgement that way. Or you do that thing that the synchronous event outside of class could be like, there's power when there's like the global dance party where everyone's singing the same song at the same time. And so is it something where people submit a track and you just even offer the opportunity for a dance party, and the playlist is generated from your students. So every day this month, every night from 5 to 5:05, we're listening to a different track. And you come back and you share your favorite dance move from it or your favorite lyric, whatever that thing is. We can get creative. Constraint amplifies creativity, and that's what the times we're in right now. Great thoughts, Clay. Such good stuff as usual, my friend. Thank you for the wisdom and the heart. And I know this is a long day of Zoom for you as well, so thanks for showing up and navigating through this with us. Always an incredible resource. We got more good stuff coming up in the new year, more webinars to share with you. It's our goal to continue to get a good pace on those and continue to deliver goodness for you. In the chat, a couple of things to notice. The big one, we got our Character Strong gym, strategies like EMR live in that gym. We have our school culture conferences coming up in 2021, led by myself and other Character Strong teammates. One of the things in there is a winter break giveaway, which is a cool thing we're doing right now, where depending on how you share it in different directions, you increase your chance to win. And then of course you got the Character Strong educator group on Facebook. Whether or not using the curricula, a great place to ask questions and feel supported by the community there. They're awesome. Lots of things to click on. We'll give you a second to do that if you need to. Otherwise, make it a great day. Thanks for showing up. And we'll see you again soon, Clay.
Thanks.